Are you looking for a zoom lens that can go from 50 all the way up to 400, which no other lens on the market can actually do? Maybe for sports, maybe for a bit of birding or for wildlife. That also has stabilization built in and is cheaper than the comparables out there while doing the same and more. If that sounds interesting to you, maybe you want to check out the 50 to 400 from Tamron and watch the rest of this video. Elephant in the room, let's get out of the way right from the get-go. Variable aperture. Ugh. If you're looking for a zoom lens that has this much reach, it's gonna have a variable aperture. They all do. If you want to spend the big bucks, you can get a fixed aperture, but you can literally get 10 of these for the same cost as one of those. And with a variable aperture, people immediately think, the depth of field, the bokeh, it's not gonna be that nice. Now at its widest, 50mm, I somewhat agree, but if you're shooting at 1, 2, 3, 400mm, you're gonna get that compression because of the zoom, like you do with any zoom lens. Another argument for not needing that depth is because a lot of these zoom lenses are used to shoot sports. And if you watch sports on TV, you'll realize pretty quick that there is very rarely any depth of field, so that you can actually see what is going on. Here's an example of some lacrosse I shot with the 135 GM at f1.8. It looks beautiful. Everything is really nicely isolated, but you can't really tell as easily what is going on in the background. So you don't necessarily want that depth, you want more to be in focus. Now if you're shooting photos for sports, obviously that might be a little bit different, but it is something to think about. Now this is a variable aperture lens that will at its widest be f4.5, all the way at 400 it will be f6.3. Now if you're worried about exposure changes as you're zooming in or out, just set it to f6.3, that way when you're at 50 or at 400, you're not going to have any issues with exposure. So who is this lens for? Well, the beauty of going from 50 to 400 means it can be used for a huge amount of things. And if you have an APS-C camera that can go into crop mode, you can actually transform this into a 600mm equivalent lens. So if you assign a button to quickly go into APS-C mode, you can technically go 50mm, hit that button, all the way to 600mm. Instead of me just listing out all the different things that you could shoot with that huge focal range, here's some photo and video that I shot with this lens.
Sometimes all I think about is you. Late nights in the middle of June. Heat waves been faking me out. Can't make you happier now. Sometimes all I think about is you. Late nights in the middle of June. Heat waves been faking me out. Can't make you happier now. Usually I put something on TV, so we never think about you and me. But today I see our reflections clearly in Hollywood, laying on the screen. You just need a
I've never been able to make an edit with mainstream chart music, and it is a really nice, welcome change. Now, you've probably thought that you can't use mainstream or chart music in your videos because you're gonna have a copyright strike or you're gonna get monetization issues, and typically you'd be right. But with Licked, which is the sponsor of today's video, you actually can. You have over 1 million chart music tracks to pick from.
Sometimes all I think about is you. We were young, the future was so bright.
There's different playlists, and you also have little filters on there as well, things like being able to pick what's popular on Spotify right now. With Licked, you also have an unlimited use stock music library. There's over 100,000 tracks in there, and that's all part of that one sane subscription. Now, a big reason to use chart music in your videos is because it gets a reaction from you. How is he using this music in this edit? Now, all of the chart licenses on Licked are valid for YouTube. Many include Instagram and Facebook, as well as some other social platforms too. Now, the more creators that end up using Licked, the more songs that they can license, which means Licked's library is constantly going to grow. As part of this video today, Licked is giving all of you guys a special offer. You can get 14 days free for their stock music and 50% off of your first chart license if you want to license a song. Click that link down below. Give it a go. I don't know anybody that doesn't want to edit their videos, the content they've made, with chart music, some of their favorite songs out there. So give it a go. Link is down below. Thank you, Licked, for sponsoring today's video. Autofocus, obviously something people are concerned with when it comes to third-party lenses. Now, a lot of this does rely on the camera that you're using. I'm using the A7S III and the FX3, so it's fairly new technology. In my experiences, for everything I shot, it was pretty solid. Now, I did find it a little bit slower in video for continuous autofocus at 400, so when I'm zoomed all the way in. And when I say slow, I don't really mean like slow, like it's still fast, just comparatively to something like the 7200 f4 at 200, I find this a little bit slower for continuous autofocus, but then this is zoomed in twice as much. So I don't really have anything to compare it to. It's just something that I kind of noticed. Once locked on though, I did find it was very accurate and it stayed locked on. There was no issues with hunting or anything like that. And I was really testing this out. A lot of the sports that I shot, very fast paced, and it did a really good job. Genuinely impressed by how it performed. In terms of photos, I blasted off some high speed plus on the A7S III with this at 12 megapixels. That can get 10 frames a second. Now I recorded the back of my camera screen here just to flick through some of the photos that I did take so you can see where the focus point landed. Remember that that is automatic focusing too. That's whatever the camera and the lens combined is telling it to focus on. A couple of times it did have troubles with the eye, but it was under the shadow of the front of a hat, so that definitely could have had something to do with it. It was a lot darker in the eyes compared to the rest of the frame. Either way, good test for you to see. I hope this provides enough examples for you in terms of photo and video autofocus performance of this lens. Now this lens has something called VC, which is something that you need at 400 millimeters. What is that? Well, it's vibration compensation, aka OSS. It has stabilization built into the lens. All the way zoomed in, you are going to get micro jitters, micro shakes, whatever you want to call them. Now you actually have two different settings on there for vibration compensation, 1 and 2. In my experience, 2 seems to work a little bit better than 1. I was trying to figure out what each one means at the time of posting this video because it's different for every Tamron lens, and I don't have a response yet, so if I have one, I'll put it in here. Otherwise, 2 seems to work better than 1, but it does do a very, very good job at completely removing any of the little shakes that you might have. Now, the way that actually works is in combination with the Sony camera's built-in stabilization as well. So you actually have an off button on here as well. Just there, and if you turn that off, it will turn off any stabilization you have on your camera as well. How about sharpness? Something that people always want to know about when it comes to lenses. Now, typically with big focal range lenses, they're not the sharpest in the world. At 400 millimeters on my A7S III at its max 12 megapixels, I really don't have anything to complain about. It's definitely not the sharpest I've ever tested, but at 400 mil, you're asking the lens to do a lot. So pretty impressive for what it can do when it's zoomed all the way in there in terms of how sharp it actually is, especially considering how fast some of these subjects were moving. Now I did do one pixel peeping test versus Sony's sharpest lens, the 135GM f1.8. I put both lenses at 135mm, both lenses at f6.3, and took the same photo. If I put both of those images side by side, are you able to tell which one is which? My guess is probably not. Hello there, just interrupting my own video. If you like the way I'm reviewing this, maybe try subscribing down below. There's no contract. You can cancel at any time. By canceling, you just unsubscribe. That's it, really. I'd appreciate it. Thanks. Back to the video. Now, something Tamron has been doing recently is adding a USB-C port to their lenses. Now, this allows you to plug it into a computer, or Mac. It does work with Mac as well. I tested it. It works fine. USB-C in, and you can update the firmware on here, but you can also use Tamron's lens utility. As well as upgrading the firmware, you can change things around on the lens. So instead of having a autofocus manual switch on here, you actually have a custom 1, 2, and 3 that you can assign to whatever you want. You also have a little button on the side there, which can also be assigned to do things too. I'll show you on the screen right now the options that you have available to you, but they're pretty interesting in terms of allowing you to use this lens in ways that you really can't use other lenses. Things like autofocus limits. So if you're shooting sports, the camera isn't hunting or trying to look past where it actually needs to focus. You can set focus presets, and you can also assign one of these to be an autofocus manual focus switch as well. You can also specify whether you want the focus ring, which is on the back, to be a linear or non-linear focus, and you can actually change this from being a focus control ring to a aperture control ring as well. How about comparables to this lens? Now, there is a few out there that are pretty comparable to this, but nothing that has quite the same focal range from 50 to 400. Now, in terms of comparables, I picked everything that has stabilization built into the lens because you absolutely need it when you're talking about a zoom of this magnitude. So I'll tell you the comparables that are out there, but the Tamron definitely offers the most value. So the 50 to 400 is a 2.6 pound lens, $1,300. The next comparable option would be the Sigma 100 to 400, so it's 2 times less wide at 100 versus 50. 2.5 pounds, a very similar weight, coming in at $950, but you don't have it nearly as wide. The Sony 200 to 600, so you get 4 times less wide at 200, 1.5 times more reach at 600, 4.65 pounds, so nearly double the weight, and $2,000, so $700 more. Then you also have the Sony 100 to 400, 3.1 pounds, so about half a pound more, 2 times less wide again at 100 like the Sigma, and $2,500, so nearly double the cost of the Tamron. So the Tamron 50-400 is definitely the most value if you're looking for something that's a little bit wider instead of something that gives you more reach past 400. Now design-wise, this actually feels, from what I can remember, very similar to the 35-150 from Tamron, but on paper, apparently it is a completely new design in terms of texture and feel and the finish and how shiny it is. And that was done to make it more scratch resistant and to reduce fingerprints getting on there. And as you can see, like the close-ups here, I'll cut to, like it doesn't have any marks of fingerprints on there whatsoever. And this has been in and out of my bag, tons. I've been using it a lot, as you can tell from all the video shot, and there's not a mark on it, which is good because it's not my lens. It's got to go back to Tamron. They also improved the grip performance of this as well by adding, they call it more protrusions in the striped pattern of the rubber rings, and it does feel like it. Like it feels very, very grippy in here. Very nice to turn. Almost better, definitely better, in fact, than the 7200 f4. This feels a lot more grippy. This reminds me more of like a Sigma focus ring, I find. I mentioned that USB-C port earlier, and you're probably wondering, well, what if water gets in there? That's actually water resistant. The whole lens, in fact, is water resistant, so it's weather sealed. A nice design choice they've made as well is by making the zoom only 75 degrees to turn, which means you can quickly zoom in and out by barely even, like you can see how much here I'm turning it. That is how much I have to turn it to zoom all the way in and all the way out. So really nice for quickly zooming in, which really does help when it comes to sports, for anything really, where if you're zoomed in, you need to quickly see where you're at to zoom in on something else. You can go out to 50, back into 400 very, very quickly, very nimbly. Nimbly? That's not a word, is it? You can do it fast. If you have Sony lenses, you will be used to the opposite of how these rings are set up. On the 7200, it's obviously all internal, but your zoom is on the back, your focus is on the front. On the Tamron 50-400, your focus or aperture, if you change it to that, is on the back, and then your zoom is actually on the front. So that does take a little bit of getting used to. In terms of switches on there, you have that vibration control switch, you have that custom 3-setting switch, you also have a button on the side there which you can assign as well, and then you also have a lock button on there which locks it at 50 and does do a very good job of locking it at 50 there. It doesn't fall out whatsoever, and you can't accidentally turn it to push it out of that. You have to unlock it and then you can turn it. So nice little lock switch on there as well, great for traveling around with. You can feel the amount of air that is being displaced as this zooms in and out. Like I can feel it coming out. It's like a little AC. Not relevant to the review, but just something I noticed. 67mm filter thread on the front there if you want to put filters on it. You can actually buy a separate shoe with a collar which locks onto here, which is Arca Swiss, for quickly changing between being on a tripod to not being on a tripod, going handheld. If you wanted to buy that, it doesn't come with it. That's a separate accessory you have to buy. Something else that's nice as well is that chromatic aberration and distortion is corrected within the lens. Your lens corrections are done inside of it, which is really good when it comes to shooting video, because it's a lot harder to fix that in video than it would be for photo. I didn't test this out, but in terms of your focus distance here, closest focus distance is 0.25 meters or 0.8 feet when you're at 50mm. If you're zoomed in to 400mm, it's a lot further at 1.2 meters or 3.9 feet. If you like the way I reviewed this lens, maybe check out this one up here. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video. Take care.